My parents claimed poverty to force a backyard potluck wedding on me, only for me to discover they secretly funded my sister's $30,000 honeymoon. Heartbroken but focused, I let them prepare for a ceremony that wasn't happening, while I walked down a real aisle elsewhere. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was shaking. It wasn't the subtle tremor of fatigue after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, nor was it the jittery buzz of caffeine. This was a deep, bone-rattling vibration that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips, making the piece of paper I was holding blur in my vision. I was standing in my parents' home office, a room that smelled of my father's expensive pipe tobacco and the lemon polish my mother, Carol, insisted on using for the mahogany desk. I had only come in here to look for a stapler. We were assembling the DIY invitations for my wedding, printed on flimsy cardstock I had bought on clearance because, as my mother had reminded me with teary eyes just yesterday, we just don't have the liquidity right now, Scarlett. The market has been brutal to your father's retirement accounts. I had believed her. I had hugged her. I had told her that I didn't need a fancy venue or a caterer, that Mark and I just wanted to be married, and a humble backyard gathering with potluck dishes would be fine. I had swallowed my disappointment, buried the dream of the garden ceremony I'd wanted since I was a little girl, and accepted that my role in this family was to be the low-maintenance one, the one who understood. But the document in my hand told a different story. It wasn't a utility bill or a bank statement. It was a glossy, heavy-stock itinerary from Elite Escapes Travel Agency. Client Tiffany and Jason. Destination, the Maldives, Overwater Bungalow Presidential Suite. Duration, 14 days. Total cost, $32,450. Status, paid in full. The date of payment was 3 days ago. 3 days ago, the exact same day my father, Richard, had sat me down at the kitchen table, held my hand, and sighed heavily while explaining that they couldn't even contribute $500 for a photographer. "We're tapped out, sweetheart," he had said, looking me right in the eye. "If we had it, we'd give it to you. You know that." I read the line again, paid in full. My stomach lurched, a violent wave of nausea that forced me to grab the edge of the desk to steady myself. The room seemed to tilt. It wasn't just the money. It was the timing. It was the lie. It was the fact that my sister Tiffany, who had been given a $60,000 wedding just last year, a wedding I had helped coordinate unpaid while working double shifts, was now getting a honeymoon worth more than my annual rent, while I was being told to ask my guests to bring their own chairs. I looked at the signature on the receipt. Richard, my father's distinct, looping scrawl. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good daughter, the one who didn't ask for things, the one who made herself small so Tiffany could shine. I had convinced myself that my parents loved us equally, just differently. I had rationalized every slight, every forgotten birthday, every disparity in gifts as circumstantial. But this paper was black and white proof. It wasn't circumstantial. It was a choice. They had $30,000. They just didn't have it for me. I heard the front door open downstairs. My mother's voice floated up the stairs, bright and cheery, a stark contrast to the devastation wreaking havoc on my internal organs. "Scarlett, are you still here? I bought some paper napkins for the reception. They were on sale, plain white, but I think they'll look very chic if we fold them right." I stared at the invoice one last time before folding it and shoving it into the pocket of my scrubs. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The betrayal wasn't just a sting, it was an evisceration. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. I walked down the stairs, one hand gripping the banister so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to consciously command my legs to move, to perform the mechanical action of descending, because my mind was still stuck in that office, staring at the number 32,450. Carol was in the kitchen, unpacking a grocery bag. She looked immaculate, as always. Even for a Tuesday afternoon errands run, she was wearing tailored linen trousers and a silk blouse, her hair coiffed into a perfect bob. She pulled out a package of generic, single-ply paper napkins and held them up like a trophy. "Look," she beamed, oblivious to the fact that her daughter looked like she had just seen a ghost. They were. E241. I was thinking we could stamp them with a cute little potato stamp or something. Make it rustic. People love rustic these days, don't they? I stared at the napkins. Then I looked at her face. It was a kind face, or so I had always thought. It was the face that had sung me lullabies. But now, all I could see was the mask. How could she stand there, excitedly waving $3 napkins in my face, knowing she had just dropped a fortune on Tiffany's vacation? "Scarlett," her smile faltered slightly. "Are you okay? You look pale. You work too hard at that hospital. I keep telling you it's going to age you prematurely." "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else standing across the room. "Just a long shift. A patient didn't make it." It was a lie, but it was the only way to explain the devastation on my face without exploding. "Oh dear," she said, her tone dismissive as she turned back to the counter. "Well, leave that sadness at the door. We have planning to do. Your father is out back measuring the patio. He's worried that if we put the folding tables too close to the hydrangeas, people might trample them. You know how much he loves those bushes." I walked into the kitchen, my movements robotic. "Mom," I started, testing the waters, needing to hear her say it one more time. "Are you sure? Are you sure we can't manage just a small venue, even the community center? It's supposed to rain that week, and the backyard doesn't have cover." Carol sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation that signaled I was being difficult. She stopped unpacking and turned to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. Her perfume, expensive and floral, filled my nose. "Scarlett, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "We have been over this. Your father and we are in a very tight spot. The economy, the investments, it's all gone south. We are scraping the bottom of the barrel here. We want to give you the world, really we do, but we have to be realistic. Humble is beautiful, humble is you." "Humble is you." The words landed like a slap. Humble wasn't me. Humble was what they had trained me to be, so I wouldn't compete with Tiffany. "I understand," I said quietly, pulling away from her touch. "I wouldn't want to put you in financial ruin." "Exactly," she said, brightening up again. "It's going to be intimate, special. Now Tiffany called. She said she's willing to let you borrow the veil she wore. Isn't that generous? Of course, you'll have to be careful with it. It's very delicate lace, imported from France." "Generous," I repeated. "Right." "She's so excited for you," Carol continued, oblivious. "She said she might even be able to squeeze in a toast, although she's very busy preparing for her trip. She needs a break, poor thing. Her job is so stressful." Tiffany worked 10 hours a week as a social media consultant for a boutique owned by her best friend. I worked 60-hour weeks in a pediatric oncology ward. I watched my mother bustle around the kitchen, talking about potato stamps and borrowed veils, and a cold clarity washed over me. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a steely, freezing resolve. They thought I was the same Scarlett I had always been. The doormat. The one who nodded and smiled and accepted the scraps. They thought this backyard wedding was going to happen exactly the way they envisioned it. Cheap, hidden away, and entirely under their control. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who had the marriage license. I was the one communicating with the few guests who actually mattered. And I was the one who had finally realized that family is a term you earn, not one you are born into. To understand why I didn't just scream at them right then and there, you have to understand the dynamic of the house I grew up in. I was 28, Tiffany was 26, 2 years difference but light years apart in treatment. When I was 16, I wanted to go to a science camp for the summer. It cost $500. My father, Richard, sat me down with a ledger and showed me the household expenses, explaining the concept of fiscal responsibility. "We just can't justify it, Scarlett," he had said. "Maybe you can mow lawns to earn it." I did. I mowed lawns all summer, missed the camp deadline, and saved the money for college instead. The following year, Tiffany wanted to go to a cheerleading camp in Florida. Cost, $2,000. They not only paid for it but bought her a new wardrobe for the trip because she needs to fit in to make connections. When I went to college, I took out loans. I worked nights as a CNA, wiping bedpans and studying anatomy on my breaks. I graduated with honors and $40,000 in debt. When Tiffany went to college, a private liberal arts school that cost 3 times my state university tuition, they paid cash. "We don't want her starting life with a burden," Carol had explained to me over a dinner I had paid for. "She's so sensitive, debt would crush her spirit." I had accepted it. I had internalized the idea that I was the strong one, the durable one. I was the Ford truck. Tiffany was the Ferrari. You don't take the Ferrari off-roading, and you don't worry about scratching the truck. That evening, Mark came over for dinner. Mark was a carpenter, steady, quiet, and incredibly observant. He had seen through my family's dynamic by our third date. He despised how they treated me, but he respected my desire to keep the peace. We sat at the dining table. The spread was meager. A pasta salad my mother had made with leftover vegetables and some garlic bread. "So," Richard said, taking a sip of the cheap table wine he had poured for us, while I knew he had a bottle of vintage Cabernet hidden in the cellar. "How are the preparations coming? Mark, have you figured out how to rig a tarp in case it rains? We can't afford a tent rental." Mark looked at me, then at Richard. His jaw tightened. "I can build a structure," he said slowly, "but lumber isn't free, Richard." "Well, surely you have scraps," Richard chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. "You're in the trade, aren't you?" Then the doorbell rang. It was Tiffany. She didn't have a key, despite living 20 minutes away, because she liked to make an entrance. She breezed in, bringing a gust of expensive perfume and chaos with her. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with the kind of glossy hair and perfect skin that comes from expensive dermatologists and zero financial stress. She was holding several shopping bags. "Hey everyone," she chirped, dropping the bags on the sofa. "Oh my God, I am exhausted. Shopping for the trip is literal cardio." She sat down at the table without asking, grabbing a piece of garlic bread. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my scrubs. "You, Scarlett, you're still in your work clothes. Did you wash your hands? I can't get sick before the Maldives." "I washed my hands, Tiffany," I said quietly. "Good," she said, chewing loudly. "So, Mom, Dad, I found the cutest bikinis today, and Jason needs new luggage. The old set is just, can we put that on the card?" Carol looked at me quickly, a flicker of panic in her eyes, then back at Tiffany. "We can talk about that later, sweetie." "Why?" Tiffany laughed. "Scarlett knows you guys are helping us. It's not a secret. Besides, Scarlett doesn't mind, do you? You're so low maintenance. You'd probably be happy getting married in a potato sack if Mark was there." She laughed again. Richard chuckled along with her. "That's our Scarlett, practical." I looked at Mark. He had stopped eating. His hand was under the table, gripping my knee, squeezing it in silent support. He was waiting for me. He was waiting for the signal to either flip the table or walk out. I looked at Richard, seeing the arrogance in his face. I looked at Carol, seeing the deceit behind her smile. And I looked at Tiffany, the sister I had defended on playgrounds and tutored through algebra, who saw me as nothing more than a background character in her life. They were discussing my wedding as if it were an inconvenience, a budget item to be minimized so the real princess could have her fun. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, cutting through Tiffany's chatter about sunscreen, "I don't mind at all. Being practical has its advantages." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that didn't reach my eyes. "In fact," I continued, "Mark and I were just thinking that the backyard is perfect. We wouldn't want to change a thing." Mark looked at me, confused. He knew I hated the backyard idea. But then he saw the look in my eyes, the cold, calculating fire that had ignited the moment I found that invoice. He relaxed his grip on my knee and leaned back, a small smirk playing on his lips. He didn't know the plan yet, but he knew I had one. Great, Richard clapped his hands. That's the spirit, keep it simple, keep it humble. Oh, don't worry, Dad, I said, picking up my wine glass. It's going to be a day none of us will ever forget. The silence in the car on the way back to our apartment was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, electric with the energy of a storm about to break. Mark drove with both hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, his jaw set so hard I could see the muscle feathering beneath his skin. 32,000, he said finally, his voice low and rough. He didn't look at me, he kept his eyes on the road, as if looking at me would break his composure. They wouldn't give us 500 for a photographer, Scarlett. They made you cry last week over the price of chicken for the potluck. I know, I whispered, staring out the window at the blurring streetlights. The invoice was burning a hole in my pocket. It's not just the money, Mark, it's the lie. They looked me in the eye and told me they were destitute. They made me feel gooey. LTY for even asking. We pulled into the driveway of our small rental duplex. Mark turned off the ignition and turned to me. So, what are we doing? Because I can't go back there and smile at them. I can't pretend I'm okay with them treating you like a second-class citizen in your own family. If we go through with this backyard farce, I'm going to lose it. I looked at him, this man who had built me a bookshelf because I mentioned I ran out of space, who rubbed my feet after every double shift without being asked. He deserved better than a folding chair in a dirt patch, and I deserved better than being my sister's doormat. We aren't doing the backyard farce, I said, the plan forming in my mind with terrifying clarity. It was like a switch had flipped. The crying daughter was gone, the triage nurse was here. But they are. Mark frowned. What do you mean? They want a humble wedding? They can have it, I said, pulling the invoice out and smoothing it on the dashboard. We're going to let them plan it. We're going to let them set up the chairs, inflate the balloons, and make the potato salad. We will let them think they have won, that they have successfully minimized me one last time. And us? Mark asked. We're going to get married, I said, a fierce smile touching my lips. Ideally, at the mill, that rustic venue by the river, the one they said was an obscene waste of money when I showed them the brochure. The mill is booked months in advance, Mark pointed out. It's a Tuesday wedding, I countered. And they had a cancellation for next month. I saw it on their Instagram this morning. I didn't mention it because I thought we couldn't afford it. We have savings, Mark said firmly. We were saving for a house, but this is for our dignity. I'd rather rent for another year than let them humiliate you. We use our savings, I agreed. And we invite the people who actually care. My nursing friends, your crew, the people who don't treat us like accessories. Okay, Mark nodded slowly, liking the sound of it. But Scarlett, where did they get the money? If Richard's retirement is truly decimated like he claims, 30 grand is a lot of cash to just manifest. If they're lying about being broke, that's one thing, but if they're moving money around. He trailed off, but he didn't have to finish. My grandmother, Nana Rose, she had passed away 4 years ago. She was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel like I was just as important as Tiffany. She had been wealthy, and she had always talked about leaving nest eggs for us. But when she died, my father, the executor, told us that end-of-life care had drained her estate to almost nothing. We had received a few sentimental trinkets, and that was it. I need to go back to the house, I said, my blood running cold. Tomorrow, when they're at their country club lunch, I have a key. I need to see the books. That's risky, Mark warned. They paid for that honeymoon 3 days ago, I said. The paper trail is fresh. If they stole from me to spoil her, Mark, I will burn the whole kingdom down. The next day, I called in sick to the hospital. It was the first time in 3 years I'd done so without a fever. I waited until I saw the notification on my phone from the family group chat, a picture of Tiffany and my mother holding mimosa glasses at the club. Wedding planning break? Mother-daughter time. I drove to their house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house was silent. I let myself in and went straight to the office. The smell of pipe tobacco was nauseating now. I didn't have to look hard. My father was arrogant. He didn't lock the file cabinet because he didn't think anyone in his house was smart enough to check his math. I found the ledger in the bottom drawer, tucked behind tax returns from 2015. It wasn't just a general household account. It was a trust account summary. The Rose H. Miller Grandchildren's Trust. I opened the folder. There were 2 sub-accounts listed. Account A, Tiffany, balance $0, closed depleted. Account B, Scarlett, balance $45,000. I stared at the number. $45,000. Nana hadn't been broke. She had left us money specifically for education or nuptials. I flipped the page to the recent transaction history for account B. Withdrawal, $32,450, Elite Escapes Travel. Withdrawal, $5,000, cash transfer to Richard Miller. Remaining balance, $7,550. They hadn't just used their own money to favor Tiffany. They had raided my trust fund, money legally left to me by my grandmother, to pay for Tiffany's honeymoon. They were funding her golden life by cannibalizing my future. I took photos of everything, every page, every bank statement. Then I put the file back exactly where I found it. I wasn't going to just sue them. I was going to destroy them. But first, I had to see if they had any shame left. I waited until that evening. I went. Tea over for dinner and planning, as requested. We were testing recipes for the potluck, specifically a 3-bean salad my mother claimed was a crowd pleaser because beans are so economical. We sat at the table. Tiffany was there, of course, scrolling on her phone. So, I started, keeping my voice terrifyingly casual. I was thinking about the honeymoon. Mark and I were looking at a camping trip upstate since the budget is so tight. That sounds lovely, Carol said, not looking up from her bean salad. Nature is very healing. It is, I agreed. Although I saw this ad for the Maldives today, it looked incredible. Overwater bungalows, private butlers, it must cost a fortune. I bet a trip like that runs. What? 30,000. The silence that fell over the table was instant and absolute. The fork halfway to Tiffany's mouth froze. Richard choked slightly on his water. Carol's eyes darted to Richard, then to me, wide with sudden panic. The Maldives, Richard stammered, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Yes, well, very touristy. Not your style, Scarlett. You prefer rustic things. I do, I said, locking eyes with him. But it's funny. I was looking through some old boxes of Nana's things, remembering how she always talked about leaving us money for our weddings. Whatever happened to that? Did it really all go to the nursing home? Richard turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. Scarlett, we've discussed this. Nana's care was expensive. Why are you bringing this up now? Are you being ungrateful for the backyard? We are opening our home to you. I'm not being ungrateful, I said, leaning forward. I'm just confused, because if Nana's money is gone and your retirement is decimated, how did you pay for Tiffany's $30,000 honeymoon package 3 days ago? Tiffany dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. How do you know about that? Tiffany screeched, looking at her parents. You said you handled it. You said she wouldn't find out. So it's true, I said, my voice rising. You paid for it. Now, listen here. Richard stood up, his face shifting from fear to anger. The defense mechanism of a narcissist caught in a trap. How dare you snoop into my finances? That is a breach of privacy, Scarlett. A breach of privacy? I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. You told me you couldn't afford a photographer. You told me to beg my friends to cook food for my wedding. And meanwhile, you're dropping a luxury car's worth of cash on a vacation for the daughter who already had the royal wedding. Tiffany needs this, Carol shouted, slamming her hand on the table. She has had a very hard year. Her anxiety has been through the roof. You are a nurse, Scarlett. You are strong. You can handle a simple wedding. Tiffany is. She is delicate. She needs the relaxation. Why can't you be happy for your sister? Because you are paying for it with lies, I yelled back. It is our money, Richard bellowed. We can spend it how we see fit. If we choose to prioritize Tiffany's mental health over your vanity party, that is our prerogative as parents. Our money, he actually said it. He looked me in the eye and claimed the money he stole from my trust was his. I stared at him. I saw the vein throbbing in his forehead. I saw the smug, petulant look on Tiffany's face, the look of a girl who knows she will never face consequences. And in that moment, I knew I had them. They thought this was the confrontation. They thought this was the extent of my anger. They thought they could bully me into submission like they always did. Fine, I said. The word hung in the air. Fine, Richard blinked, confused by my sudden capitulation. Fine, I repeated, lowering my voice, feigning defeat. I slumped my shoulders, letting the tired nurse persona take over. You're right, it's your money, I shouldn't have looked, I'm stressed, I'm jealous, I admit it. Carol let out a long breath, smoothing her blouse. Well, it takes a big person to admit that, Scarlett, we forgive you. We do, Richard grunted, sitting back down. Just, don't bring it up again. It puts a damper on the celebration. I won't, I said. Let's focus on the backyard wedding. I want it to be perfect. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the bean salad. It tasted like ash, but I swallowed it, because I wasn't eating dinner. I was eating the bait in my own trap. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in deception. On the surface, I was the contrite daughter. I came over every evening to help clear brush from the backyard. I nodded when Carol suggested we use plastic tablecloths because cleaning linen is such a hassle. I even smiled when Tiffany showed me the bikinis she bought for the Maldives, holding them up against her body while I was on my knees weeding the patio pavers. I just can't wait to get away, Tiffany sighed, sipping an iced tea while I wiped sweat from my forehead. You're so lucky, Scarlett. You don't have high expectations, so you're never disappointed. I'm always worried things won't be perfect. That must be a heavy burden, I said, ripping a dandelion out by the root. It is, she said earnestly. It really is. While I played the part of Cinderella, Mark and I were executing a military-grade operation in the background. We booked the mill for the same date and time as the backyard ceremony. We sent out digital invitations to 50 people, my colleagues, Mark's contractor friends, my old college roommates, and the few cousins who knew how toxic my immediate family was. The invitation had a strict confidentiality clause. Do not post on social media until after the ceremony. This is a surprise. Everybody knew, when you're the family scapegoat, people notice more than you think. My head nurse, Brenda, texted me, "About time you cut them loose, honey. I'll bring the good champagne." But I needed the final nail in the coffin. I needed to ensure that when the blow landed, it would be legally fatal, not just emotionally. I contacted a lawyer friend of mine, David. I met him for coffee 2 days before the wedding and showed him the photos of the trust ledger. David whistled low. "Scarlett, this is textbook embezzlement. If that trust was in your name and he moved the funds to his personal account and then to a travel agency without your consent, that's grand larceny. That's fraud." "Can we prove it wasn't a gift?" I asked. "The trust deed will show the terms," David said. "Nana Rose likely had strict stipulations. If he withdrew it as executor, he has a fiduciary duty. Spending it on another beneficiary's vacation is a breach. I can have a demand letter drafted and ready to serve. We can freeze their assets, Scarlett. We can put a lien on their house." "Do it," I said, "but don't serve it yet. Have it ready for the day after the wedding." "You're cold," David smiled, impressed. "I like it." I went back to my parents' house for the final walkthrough. The venue looked pathetic. A few strings of Christmas lights, mismatched folding chairs borrowed from the neighbors, and a cooler for drinks. Richard was standing on the deck, surveying the scene with a self-satisfied grin. "Looks good," he said. "Simple, effective, you see, Scarlett. You don't need to spend $40,000 to get married. It's about the love." "You're right, Dad," I said, standing beside him. "It really clarifies things. You know, I was thinking, since you guys were so generous with the backyard, maybe Mark and I should pay for the drinks. I can pick up a few kegs." "Oh, would you?" Carol piped up from the doorway. "That would be a huge help. Alcohol is so pricey and your father's liquidity is still, well, you know." "I know," I said. "I'll handle it. In fact, why don't Mark and I handle the pickup of the cake and the ice on the morning of? You guys just relax. Get dressed. Be ready in the backyard at 2:00 p.m. for the guests to arrive." "That sounds wonderful," Carol said, visibly relieved that she wouldn't have to lift a finger. "We'll just be here, greeting everyone." "Perfect," I said. Then the second confrontation happened. It was small, but it was the confirmation I needed to go through with the nuclear option. I was in the kitchen, getting a glass of water. Tiffany walked in. She looked at me, then at the counter where my purse was sitting. "Hey," she said. "So, I was thinking, since you're saving so much money on this wedding, maybe you could chip in for my plane upgrade. Economy is going to kill my back, and I want to be fresh for the resort." I stared at her. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. They had stolen my inheritance to pay for her trip, given me a dirt patch wedding, and now she wanted my paycheck to upgrade her stolen seat. "You want me to pay for your upgrade?" I asked slowly. "Well, yeah," she shrugged. "You're working all the time, you have disposable income. And honestly, Scarlett, you owe me, I'm lending you my veil. That's a rental value of like $300. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the hollowness, the greed, the absolute lack of empathy. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't take too long," she snapped. "Prices go up tomorrow." "Don't worry," I said, grabbing my purse. "By tomorrow, everything is going to be different." I walked out of the house. I sat in my car and called Mark. "Is the venue confirmed?" I asked. "Confirmed," Mark said. "Flowers are ordered. The officiant is ready." "Good," I said, watching my parents' house in the rearview mirror. "Because I'm done. Let's get married." The morning of the wedding was a study in contrasts. At my parents' house, I imagined the chaos was beginning to brew. I pictured Carol frantically arranging store-bought flower bouquets into plastic vases, cursing the wind that was likely blowing over the paper. Pekins she had been so proud of. I pictured Richard sweating through his shirt as he dragged the cooler full of cheap beer across the patio, and Tiffany likely complaining that the humidity was going to ruin her blowout before she even got on the plane to the Maldives. But I wasn't there to see it. I was 15 miles away, standing in the bridal suite of the mill. The room smelled of lavender and old wood. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling industrial windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. My dress, a stunning, vintage-inspired lace gown I had bought off the rack at a consignment shop 3 towns over, fitted me perfectly. I hadn't shown it to anyone but Mark. To my mother, I was supposed to be wearing a simple white sundress I already owned. "You look breathtaking," Brenda, my head nurse and maid of honor, said, wiping a tear from her eye. She handed me a glass of champagne, the good stuff, Veuve Clicquot, not the sparkling cider my father had suggested we use for the toast to keep costs down. "I feel light," I admitted, looking at my reflection. For the first time in years, the weight of my family's expectations, their debts, and their emotional blackmail wasn't pressing down on my shoulders. "Is everyone here?" 50 people, Brenda smiled. "Everyone who loves you, no one who wants something from you." I checked my phone. It was 1:45 p.m. The backyard wedding was scheduled to start at 2:00 p.m. By now, my parents would be looking at the driveway, wondering where the groom was, wondering where the bride was. I opened the family group chat. My thumb hovered over the send button. I had drafted the message the night before. It wasn't just a cancellation text, it was a detonation. To Mom, Dad, Tiffany. CC. Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, Grandma Jean, and the entire extended family list. Message: I won't be at the backyard today. There is no wedding there. I am getting married at the mill, surrounded by people who respect me. Do not come. Also, regarding the financial hardships that forced this budget wedding, I know about the trust. I know about the $32,450 stolen from Nana's account to pay for Tiffany's honeymoon. The authorities have been notified. Enjoy the potato salad. I hit send. Then I turned my phone off, handed it to Brenda, and walked out to the ceremony space. The ceremony was magic. We stood in front of a reclaimed wood altar draped in greenery. Mark looked handsome in a charcoal suit he had bought himself. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears, and in that moment the world narrowed down to just the two of us. We said our vows, real vows, about partnership and truth, and when he kissed me, the applause from our friends was deafening. But the peace didn't last. I knew it wouldn't. We were halfway through the cocktail hour, standing on the terrace overlooking the river, when the screech of tires shattered the ambience. A familiar luxury SUV skidded into the gravel parking lot of the mill, kicking up a cloud of dust. My parents didn't just come, they invaded. Richard stormed out of the driver's side, his face a mottled purple of rage. Carol scrambled out of the passenger seat, still clutching a bag of party favors. Tiffany followed, looking less angry and more panicked, her phone glued to her ear. They marched up the steps to the terrace, pushing past a confused waiter. The music died down. My guests, my nurses, Mark's construction crew, our college friends, fell silent, forming a protective semicircle around us. "Scarlett," Richard roared, his voice booming across the quiet riverbank. "What the hell is this? We have guests waiting in the backyard. Mrs. Higgins is sitting in a lawn chair wondering where the bride is." "Hello, Dad," I said calmly, stepping forward. Mark moved to stand beside me, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. "I told you I wasn't coming." "You sent that vicious text to the whole family?" Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. "Aunt Linda is calling me nonstop. How could you humiliate us like this, after everything we've done for you?" "After everything you've done to me," I corrected, my voice steady, projecting clearly so everyone could hear. "You mean stealing my inheritance?" "That is a lie," Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. That money was in the Rose H. Miller Grandchildren's Trust," I interrupted, cutting him off with surgical precision. "Designated for education or nuptials. Beneficiary, Scarlett Miller. Withdrawal date, 4 days ago. Payee, Elite Escapes Travel. Purpose, Tiffany's Maldives honeymoon." A gasp rippled through the crowd of guests. My friends whispered to one another. Tiffany went pale, lowering her phone. "You have no right," Richard snarled, stepping closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me like he had when I was a child. "I am your father. I manage the finances. You are ungrateful, selfish." "I am a grown woman," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "And I am done funding your golden child lifestyle with my future." "It's just a loan," Tiffany yelled suddenly, stepping up beside her father. "I was going to pay it back. I deserve a honeymoon. You're just jealous because Mark can't afford to take you anywhere nice." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the entitlement. She knew the ride was over. "It's not a loan, Tiffany," I said softly. "It's embezzlement, and unlike Dad, I keep receipts." I signaled to the back of the room. David, my lawyer, stepped forward from the crowd. He wasn't dressed for a wedding, he was in his full litigation suit. He carried a thick manila envelope. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," David said, his voice professional and cold. "I am representing Mrs. Scarlett Well, soon to be Mrs. Bennett, in the matter of the misappropriated trust funds. You have been served with a forensic accounting demand and a temporary restraining order on all remaining assets." He handed the envelope to Richard. My father stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. You sued us," Carol whispered, her hand going to her throat, "on your wedding day." "No," I said. "I defended myself on my wedding day. You chose to make it a crime scene." We're family, Richard bellowed, throwing the envelope onto a table, scattering the hors d'oeuvres. You don't do this to family. We raised you. We fed you. You fed me scraps, I said, stepping closer to him, my eyes blazing. You fed me lies. You told me you couldn't afford a photographer while you bought Tiffany a first-class ticket. You told me to be humble while you stole from my grandmother. That isn't family, Richard. That's a parasite. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Get out, Mark said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was terrifyingly deep. He stepped in front of me, crossing his arms. Behind him, 6 of his crew, burly guys who framed houses for a living, stepped forward, cracking knuckles and setting down drinks. Richard looked at Mark. He looked at the wall of men behind him. He looked at the guests who were now glaring at him with open disgust. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had no power here. This wasn't his house. I wasn't his little girl, and he was outnumbered. You're making a mistake, Richard spat, his face pale and sweaty. You're cutting yourself off. Don't expect a penny from us when you come crawling back. I don't want your pennies, I said. I want my $32,000, and David will make sure I get it. Come on, Richard, Carol sobbed, grabbing his arm. Everyone is staring. Let's go. We have to call Linda. They turned and fled. It wasn't a dignified exit. Richard tripped slightly on a rug, Tiffany was furiously typing on her phone, and Carol was weeping into her hands. They scrambled into the SUV and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving a silence that was instantly filled with the sound of cheering. The rest of the reception was a blur of joy, but it was a grounded, fierce kind of joy. We danced, we ate real food, catered by a local chef, not a potluck, and we drank the good champagne. The cloud that had hung over me for my entire life, the feeling of being less than, had vanished with the taillights of that SUV. The fallout, however, was swift and brutal. David didn't waste time. The next morning, while Mark and I were having breakfast in bed at a local B&B, my parents' world began to crumble. The demand letter froze their accounts. The evidence of the wire transfer from the trust to the travel agency was irrefutable. Because Richard had acted as the executor of Nana's estate, his misuse of the funds wasn't just a family dispute. It was a breach of fiduciary duty. David gave them 2 options: immediate repayment of the full amount plus legal fees, or we proceeded with criminal charges for embezzlement. They chose the former, but it cost them dearly. They didn't have the liquidity. My mother hadn't been lying about their cash flow, only about where it was going. To pay me back, they had to cash out a significant portion of their own 401(k)s, incurring massive tax penalties. As for Tiffany, the honeymoon was the first casualty. Since the payment to the travel agency was flagged as proceeds of fraud in our legal claim, the agency froze the booking. Tiffany tried to go anyway, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but when she arrived at the airport, she found out the tickets had been voided. She called me 2 days later. You ruined my life, she sobbed into the phone. Jason is furious. We're stuck in our apartment. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I already posted about the trip. I didn't ruin your life, Tiffany, I said, sitting on the porch of the small cabin Mark and I had rented for a weekend getaway. I just stopped you from living it on my dime. Maybe you can take a humble trip. I hear camping is very healing. I hung up it. ND blocked her number. It took 6 months for the dust to fully settle. I received a check for $45,000, the full amount of the trust, plus interest. We didn't spend it on a lavish trip or a fancy car. We used it as a down payment on a house, a fixer-upper with a big backyard. We didn't invite my parents to the housewarming. In fact, I haven't spoken to Richard or Carol since the day at the mill. I heard from Aunt Linda that they are telling people I had a mental breakdown and became greedy, but nobody in the family really believes them anymore. The evidence was too loud. Mark and I spent our first anniversary in that backyard. We didn't have a big party. We just had a fire pit, some good wine, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. I looked at Mark across the firelight. He was sanding a piece of wood for a new table he was building us. You know, I said, smiling, they were right about one thing. What's that? Mark asked, looking up. A backyard celebration really is underrated. Mark laughed, that deep, warm sound that made me feel safe. Yeah, but the company makes all the difference. I looked up at the stars, clear and bright above our own home, paid for with my own truth. I had lost a family, yes, but I had found myself. And that was a trade I would make 1,000 times over.